Hi, I'm Katie Crane, and this is the Pilates Lounge. Hi everyone, welcome to episode 2 of the Pilates Lounge. Now, if you have not yet listened to episode 1, I think that you would be well versed to go back. You could listen to it after this episode, no problem, but episode 2 is a continuation of episode 1, which was the very first part of the Pilates principles. The first 4 principles we went through were centering, concentration, control, and precision. And I decided to break the principles down into 3 separate episodes simply so that it made it easier for you to listen to. So today we are going to use the entire episode and talk just about breath. But before we get started, I want you to know why we are here. Now, the Pilates Lounge is a podcast designed for Pilates professionals, for movement enthusiasts and educators. It is designed to offer an engaging platform to discuss, learn, and share the latest in the Pilates industry, making it a go-to hub for those of you that are passionate about Pilates and movement education. So if you enjoy listening to this episode, I really would love it if you would like and share with your other Pilates professional friends so that we can get the word out there. Because there really is not many platforms that are just about Pilates. And the reality of it is, Pilates on its own is a huge topic. And over the season of this series, I am going to not only be talking to you on my own, but I will be bringing some really special guests on so that we can really delve deep into all things movement. So without further ado, today's episode is all about breath, and I utilized this topic or this principle just as one episode, and seriously, I could have gone on much longer. So keep an eye out for another episode where we will talk again about breath, but from a different leaning point. Today, this is all about breath as a Pilates principle. And we all know that Joe Pilates himself was known to be said that breath is the first and the last act of life. So if we can do one thing for our students, for our clients, it is to teach them how to breathe properly. I hope that you enjoy this episode, and remember to like and share it with all of the other beautiful Pilates professionals out there in the world. Let's get started. So let's have a look at the physiology of breathing. To obtain energy, we must release energy contained in the chemical bonds of molecules such as sugars. So the foods that we eat, such as carbohydrates and proteins, are digested in our gastrointestinal tract into molecules, such as sugars and amino acids, and they become small enough to pass into the blood. So that blood transports the sugars to the cells where the mitochondria break up their chemical bonds to release energy that they contain. But the cells need oxygen to be able to carry out that process. So as everybody knows that every cell in our body requires energy, it means that every single cell in the body also requires oxygen. So the energy released is stored in a chemical compound called adenosine triphosphate, otherwise known as ATP. So this contains 3 phosphate groups, and we need energy to carry out an activity. So ATP is broken down into adenosine diphosphate, ADP, which contains only 2 phosphate groups. Breaking the chemical bond between the third phosphate group and ATP releases a high amount of energy. And think about it, we don't just need energy for our daily activities, we need energy to even continue to breathe. So it's a circular or a cycle within the body. Now, our lungs supply oxygen from the outside air to the cells via blood and the cardiovascular system to enable us to obtain energy. So as we breathe in, oxygen enters the lungs and diffuses into the blood. It's taken to the heart and pumped into the cells. At the same time, the carbon dioxide, which is a waste from all of the breakdown of sugars in the cells of the body, diffuses into the blood and then from the blood into the lungs and is expelled as we exhale. So one gas, oxygen, is exchanged for another gas, carbon dioxide. If you think about it, your blood cells can only transport so much of something. And the carbon dioxide and oxygen are around about the same size in molecule. So if you need to get oxygen into the blood, then your body needs to swap that for the carbon dioxide, which is why the inhale and exhale are both equally important. Now, this exchange of gases takes place both in the lungs and in the cells. So in the lungs, it's known as external respiration, and in the cells, it's known as internal respiration. Now, our respiratory system comprises a conduction zone and a respiratory zone. The conduction zone brings air from the external environment to the lungs via a series of tubes through which air travels. So those tubes are basically your nasal cavity, the pharynx, which is the part of the throat behind the mouth and nasal cavity, the larynx, otherwise known as the voice box, the trachea or windpipe, the bronchi and bronchioles. So aside from conducting air to the lungs, did you know that these tubes are also responsible for warming the incoming air? So that process of energy in the body can only be done at a certain temperature. So all of our cavities in which we are breathing into actually help warm that air to a certain temperature. All of those cavities would also do things like filter out small particles and dust, also moisten the air for the ease of the gas exchange in the lungs. The lungs is a moist arena. So it's like if you put something wet into water, it takes on water easier compared if you were to put a dry cloth into water. It takes a little bit longer for that initial stage of the wetness to happen. So as the air goes in through those cavities, it goes through the mucus areas and it becomes more moist. Now we have two lungs, in case you did not know. We have a left and a right lung. They are contained in what's called the thoracic cavity or the chest. So surrounding the lungs are ribs, which not only protect the lungs and, of course, the heart from damage, but also serve as anchors for the intercostal muscles. So the intercostal muscles are the muscles between each rib. As we inhale, those muscles expand or eccentrically contract. As we exhale, the intercostal muscles concentrically contract to help push the air in and out of the body. So beneath the lungs is a very large dome-shaped muscle called the diaphragm. The diaphragm is huge. I was fortunate enough to go over to the University of Dundee in Ireland, and when I was there, we worked with cadavers, people who donate their bodies to science. And I was in a room with mostly movement professionals and anatomists and fascial experts. And we had the opportunity to work with these bodies in ways that was so eye-opening. I think there was about 8 bodies there from memory. And one of the bodies that we worked with, the group of people, because we were in groups of 3 or 4, that worked on this one particular body, decided that they wanted to take out the diaphragm, the pelvic floor, and transverse abdominals. And when they got to opening the rib of this woman who was on the table, the expansive properties of the diaphragm were something to behold. I never realized just how much space the diaphragm took up. But it is this beautiful dome-shaped muscle that lives within the rib cage. So all of these muscles are attached to the lungs by visceral and parietal membranes. Now, when the intercostal muscles contract, they move up and away from the thoracic cavity. So the thoracic cavity is the space of the thorax. And when the diaphragm contracts, it moves down towards the abdomen. So as we breathe in, the intercostal muscles expand or contract eccentrically to open the rib cage up, and the diaphragm descends into the body or down to the lower part of the rib cage to allow for those beautiful lungs to fill up like a balloon. This movement of the muscles causes the lungs, of course, to expand with air like bellows or like balloons. Now, conversely, when those muscles, the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles, relax, the thoracic cavity gets smaller and the volume of lungs decrease, so air is expelled. We perform exhalation. Now, when I say relax, it's not that they switch off altogether. Something that I actually learned when I was working with these anatomists in the University of Dundee was that muscles are never switched off. They're never completely relaxed. So our idea of relaxed does not mean that they're not on. They're just on at an appropriate level of tone to perform whatever action or activity is being performed. So actually what happens when we exhale is it's a contraction of those muscles, or a concentrically contraction rather than eccentric. Now, when the thoracic muscles contract, the volume of the lungs expands, so there is suddenly less pressure inside of them. The air in the lungs has more space, so it's not pushing against the lung walls with the same pressure. And to equalize that pressure, air rushes in until the pressure is the same on the inside and outside. So your body is always looking to equalize pressure, which is what forces us to inhale and exhale. Conversely, when those muscles relax, the volume of the lungs decreases, the air in the lungs has less space, and now it's at high pressure, so the air is expelled until the pressure is equalized. Now, you would probably have noticed that the way that we breathe changes to match our activity. So the way that we are breathing is very different when we're sleeping or when we are meditating, when we're sitting reading a book, compared to when you're running for the bus, when you're performing a Pilates jump board class, compared to when you're walking down the street, when you're just getting your footwork in. Very different, a very altered breathing in each activity. So what happens when we move our skeletal muscles, we use energy, and therefore we need more sugar and oxygen if the activity is more advanced or more strenuous. So muscles have a good blood supply, bringing oxygen and glucose and taking away the waste, which is in the form of carbon dioxide. So as muscles move more, the heart pumps faster to increase the blood supply so that we get more glucose and more oxygen to the cells to produce more energy. Now, the respiratory rate can be increased or decreased to suit the amount of oxygen needed. To increase the respiratory rate, effectors in the lungs are triggered to ventilate inhale and exhale faster. So carbon dioxide is actually removed and oxygen is brought in more quickly. At the same time, there's messages that are sent from the brain to the heart to beat faster so that that oxygenated blood is pumped quicker into the cells. So the depth of breathing can also be altered so that a larger or smaller volume of air is taken into the lungs. So let's recap. Energy in our bodies is obtained by breaking the chemical bonds in molecules. The oxygen sourced from the air is a vital ingredient in the process of energy synthesis. The respiratory system is designed to facilitate gas exchange so that cells receive oxygen and get rid of carbon dioxide. And breathing changes throughout the day according to our activities. So why is it that so many people seem to not know how to breathe well? Well, as a movement practitioner and as a lover of movement, I believe that movement really is one of the key factors in teaching people to breathe better or breathe correctly. So just by getting people to do the work, just by getting them on the mat or on a machine doing their home program, for a lot of those people, their breath is going to improve simply because they're moving their body and in particular their torso in all different ranges to allow for more elasticity and allow for more expansion of the thoracic cavity to be able to take in more breath and in turn to get rid of breath, because a big part of breathing is getting rid of toxic waste that our body is no longer using in the form of that exhalation, in the form of carbon dioxide. Now we know, of course, that breath can really help facilitate the connection of those deep core muscles. So let's look at the physiology of that. When you inhale, remember the diaphragm descends into the body. At the same time, the pelvic floor is going to slightly descend as well, because remember, the body is always maintaining the same intra-abdominal pressure or the same pressure within the body. So if one thing is descending and something below it then needs to also descend, and pelvic floor and diaphragm are stacked one on top of each other, so they both descend, which means as we exhale, pelvic floor is going to elevate at the same time as diaphragm elevates or diaphragm ascends. Those guys work together all the time throughout our breath. Now, the pelvic floor is designed partly, of course, to control bladder function. And if you think about it, any forceful exhalation, laugh, cough, sneeze, they're all activities where we need our pelvic floor to contract so that we don't wet ourselves, especially in public. So pelvic floor will contract when there's a forceful exhalation. It's one of the reasons that we teach a forceful exhalation or an exhalation in general on an exertion of movement, is simply because then the core muscles will do their job. Some of us are cueing pelvic floor abdominals. Some of us are not cueing pelvic floor abdominals. There will be an episode on cueing at another time, so look out for that, but I'm not going to go into that today. But just know, forceful exhalation or exhalation, laugh, cough, sneeze, will encourage pelvic floor activation to elevate, to hold the bladder. Now, when somebody gets confused about breathing, and it happens all the time, I'm sure I'm not the only one who has had a student in class ask me, when am I exhaling? When am I inhaling? When am I breathing? What is the breath sequence? Personally, I make sure that we have touched on all of the other Pilates principles first before I get too picky on breathing. So we're thinking of centering, concentration, control, precision, before I really too concerned about breath. The reason being, A, is because breathing can be confusing. And by being too strict on how the breath should be or in what part of the exercise, what part of the sequence, when somebody is learning a sequence of exercises or a movement, restricting them with their breath or trying to control their breath too soon can actually be a block in their way. It can be like an extra hurdle. So I always say to a client, if they ask when we're doing something to start with, when am I meant to breathe? Just breathe when it feels appropriate for you. Just breathe naturally. Don't think about it. As long as you're not holding your breath, then you're good. Because the worst thing that somebody can do is hold their breath. Remember, it's the exchange of oxygen into the blood supply that gives us energy. And also it cleanses our blood, it cleanses all of our organs. Every single process in the body requires oxygen. So if you're holding your breath and using energy at the same time and not getting rid of that toxic waste, then you're going to end up with too much toxic load. So breathe, full stop. Once we've performed the exercise, once they've got the control, the precision, and the basics down packed, then we start to focus on breathing. And sometimes I allow for the client to take the lead. I observe how their body moves, what is working for them, and then I decide with them what is best for them. Now, I know with breath, the general rule is I breathe out on the exertion of movement, except on a back extension, because if you take a deep inhale, what happens to your spine? It extends. When I take a deep exhale, what happens to your spine? It gently flexes. That's the movement of the spine to allow for the thoracic cavity to expand and retract, to allow for the intercostals to expand, to allow for the diaphragm to move down and the lungs to bellow. So on extension, I inhale on the movement. I inhale during a spinal extension. Otherwise, I tend to exhale, but don't worry too much about it until they are performing the exercise. Now, when you listen to my other podcast, I also go into not only the importance of the mechanics of breath, but how different breath makes us feel. So if we encourage our customers, our clients, our students just to be breathing full stop, and then we get to explore or really delve deep into different types of breathing, then they will potentially feel the work deeper and much more succinctly. So yes, breathing is super, super important. We want to bring it to our clients' attention and we want it to be a focus of what they do, but we don't want breath to be a hurdle in their learning either. Now, I hope that this podcast today has allowed you to go a little bit deeper on the principles of Pilates. Think a little bit further than what your initial perception of the principles were, and really appreciate the expansive knowledge that we have within our industry and how these principles really allow us to grasp onto so many different ideals and so many different ideas and integrate it into the work that we're doing so that our clients, our students, and our own body can perform optimally and really feel the benefits of Pilates in the mind, body, and soul, just as Joseph Pilates intended. Now, before I finish up today, I just want to remind you, that there is an episode before this one, which is with the first 4 principles in Pilates. So go back and listen to it if you haven't already. And there's going to be one more episode. This is a 3-part series. And the last principle that I'm speaking about is flow. Now, flow is where we get to bring all of these first 5 principles together to create magic for our clients. So you definitely want to listen to the next episode. If you have enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you like and share it with your Pilates professional and movement loving friends so that we can get the word out there and really create a community right here in this hub. Be sure to check out my website, thepilatesprofessional.com. pilates.com.au and have a look if you can find any workshops, which I'm sure you can, that you may be needing right now. Remember, I also do a 6-month reformer teacher training mentor program. I call it a mentor program because I literally personally mentor each student through their own program until they are ready to teach reformer. It's what I specialize in. And I think that this is one of the biggest missing links in our industry right now, is that we have these wonderful diploma level training workshops that people can do to become very comprehensively trained in Pilates. But when it comes to reformer, it's so wishy-washy out there that you could become an instructor online with no personal access to a mentor ever, or you could become a reformer instructor as a stepping stone to diploma level training. So where I come into it is I just do reformer teacher training that is recognised and recommended by the Pilates Association of Australia, which means that my students then become members of PAA. It's super important for our industry, and it's what our students deserve. So if you know somebody who is looking to become a reformer teacher, then this is where you want to send them, the pilatesprofessional.com.au. They can reach out to me. I can have a call with them and see if I have a program that is coming up that is suitable for them. And or I also do a host of online workshops for you to expand your repertoire and your understanding specifically of the Pilates work. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Katie Crane. I'm the Pilates professional, and this is the Pilates Lounge.